Why'd you open the door when no one else would? Out here, you're not a stranger. Just a man who's cold.
By the time the storm dropped to 9 degrees, every lit window in the county had already gone dark to the stranger limping down the pass. A hotel had waved him off at the door. A gas station had pointed him back into the wind. A man with a porch light had stood still and let the knocking stop on its own. 60 years old, soaked through, no name anyone bothered to ask. Just a drifter in a ruined coat, the kind of man people decide about in half a second. The last door on the mountain belonged to Wade Corliss. 50 years old, a quiet Army veteran who ran a half-dead motor lodge and owed more than he could pay. $58 sat in his cash box. 9 days stood between him and the morning the bank took the rest. He had every reason in the world to keep that door shut, too. He opened it anyway. 9 days later, at 6 minutes past dawn, 31 trucks came grinding up that frozen pass, and a whole town finally learned who the stranger really was. 9 days before any of that, Wade Corliss was doing what he did every morning of his life. He woke at 5 without an alarm because the Army had taken his alarm away 30 years ago and never given it back. He folded the blanket into thirds. He set his boots toe out at the foot of the cot, the way a man does when he might need to put them on fast in the dark. Old habits. They didn't cost anything, and on a morning when $58 was the whole story, that mattered. The Larkspur Motor Lodge sat at 8,000 feet on the long climb toward Togwotee Pass, 12 units in a low timber row, a gravel lot, and a little cafe off the office that everyone in Three Valleys still called Ruth's. The sign out front had said vacancy for so long the C had burned out, so it read VANCY, and Wade had never gotten around to fixing it because the truth was there were no rooms to fill anyway. Past the office, past the dead ice machine, hung the one thing on the property he checked first every single day, a porch lamp with an amber bulb, the color of weak honey, screwed into a fixture by the office door. He flipped it on. It was already morning, gray and getting grayer, and the lamp did nothing useful in the daylight. He turned it on anyway. Emery Whitlock had wired that lamp himself in 1991 and had never once let it go dark while he was alive. "Leave the light on," Emery used to say. "A man finds it, he knows somebody's awake. A man finds it dark, he keeps driving, and then God knows what." Wade had buried Emery 2 Octobers back, in a cemetery downhill where the wind never quit. He'd kept the lamp burning every night since. That was the deal. Leave the light on, look after Ruth, and the lodge was his. There had been no lawyer in the room when they made it, just 2 men and a bottle of bad coffee. And as far as Wade was concerned, that made it more binding, not less. He went into the office and turned the bank letter face down on the desk, which was where it lived. He'd turned it face down so many times the paper had gone soft at the fold. 11,400, it said, when it was face up, which was never. 9 days, it might as well have said. The cash box held a 23 tens, a 5 and 3 crumpled singles. $58. He'd counted it twice the night before, the way you check a thing twice, not because the number changes, but because you keep hoping it will. Next door, through the wall, he could hear Ruth in the cafe kitchen. The scrape of a sheet pan, the oven door, the small hiss of the burner catching. Ruth Whitlock was 70 and cooked like she was feeding a barracks. She had decided, somewhere in the long, flat grief after Emery, that the cure for everything was a hot biscuit handed to a person before they could refuse it, and Wade had stopped arguing with her about the math of it. There was no math. She gave the biscuit, then she figured the cost. Usually in that order, usually. "Morning," he said, ducking through the connecting door. "You sleep?" Ruth didn't look up from the dough, flour to the wrists. "Some. You're a liar, Wade Corliss, but you're a polite one." She slid a mug across the steel counter without being asked. Black, no sugar, the way he'd taken it since a field hospital outside Mosul, where sugar was a rumor. "Della's coming up after first period. She wants the weekend shift." I told her yes. We can't pay her, but I told her yes. "We'll find it." Out of what? It wasn't a question. Ruth knew the cash box number as well as he did. They'd just agreed, somewhere over the years, not to say it out loud at the same time. The way you don't both lean on a railing you know is loose. Della Crane came up the gravel a little after 8, backpack on one shoulder, breath fogging. 17, all elbows and certainty. She dropped the pack by the register and pulled a folded pamphlet out of her coat like it was contraband. Paramedic program, she said. Casper College. There's a scholarship deadline in the spring. I did the math on the drive time, Wade. It's 2 hours each way, but I could do weekends and... Show me the math later, Wade said. Show me you can read a blood pressure cuff first. I can read a cuff. Then you're ahead of half the county. He meant it as a joke. It wasn't entirely a joke. The nearest ambulance to the Larkspur lived in Dubois, 16 miles down the mountain, and the nearest hospital with a cardiac team was a 40-minute run on a clear day. On a bad day, the pass closed and the 40 minutes became forever. Up here, a person in trouble had whoever happened to be awake, and whatever that person happened to know. Wade thought about that more than he let on. He'd spent a career being the person who happened to know things, and the lodge had a way of making him the only one for miles. Della pinned the pamphlet to the corkboard by the office door, next to Emery's house rules, which were hand-lettered on a warped index card, and had hung there long enough to yellow. Be honest about the bill. Be patient with the slow ones. We don't leave a man out in the cold, not on my watch and not on yours. Wade had read it 10,000 times. He read it again. He always did. 40 minutes down the mountain and a world away, in a glass-walled sales office that smelled of new carpet and ambition, Vivian Marsh was looking at a rendering of a place that did not yet exist. The rendering was beautiful. It was called, in clean sans serif across the bottom, the Crest at Taguari, a destination zort, and it showed a lodge of stone and timber with floor-to-ceiling glass, a heated pool steaming against a fake blue dusk beautiful people in expensive coats who did not look cold. Vivian had commissioned that rendering. She had stared at it the way other people stared at photographs of their children. The investor flies in Thursday, said the man across the table. Royce Tilden wore a quarter zip and the particular tone of someone who had never once paid a bill late. He did acquisitions, which was a polite word for the thing he actually did, which was find the soft spot in a thing and lean on it until it gave. Cale doesn't waste trips. If he's coming up himself, the man's serious. Then we give him a serious site. Vivian tapped the rendering. Clean. One parcel, one owner, no loose ends. There's a loose end. Roy slid a county tax record across the table without ceremony. 8,000 feet, 12 units, a cafe. Sits right across the access road from your frontage. Owner's behind on a balloon note. 11/4, due the end of the month. So buy it. I'm working it. Quiet. The bank's nervous. The owner's broke. And the property's worth more to us as a teardown than it'll ever be worth to him standing. Royce closed the folder. By the time he understands what's happening, it'll be done. Vivian looked at the rendering a moment longer. She had grown up 40 miles from here, in a town that did not appear on any rendering, and she had spent 30 years making sure no one who met her now would ever guess it. She did not like loose ends. Loose ends were where you came from. Make it clean, she said. Back up the pass, the afternoon light went thin and yellow, then gray, then the particular flat white that comes before snow at altitude. Wade was outside reseating a gutter bracket when the radio in the office crackled the 4 o'clock advisory, and he stopped with the screwdriver, still in the bracket, to listen. The voice on the radio said the storm had moved faster than the models. It said the front that was supposed to arrive overnight. Friday was now expected by full dark tonight. It said motorists on US 26 over Tagwati should expect rapid accumulation, single-digit temperatures, and the possibility of closures with little warning. It said, in the bored cadence of a man reading numbers he could not feel, travel is not advised. Wade looked up the road, where the pass climbed and disappeared into a sky the color of a dead television. Then he looked down it, toward Dubois, toward the ambulance that lived 16 miles away on a good road that was about to stop being good. He finished the bracket. He went inside and topped off the salt by the office door, and he checked that the amber lamp had a spare bulb in the drawer, the way Emery had taught him, because a light that goes out in a storm is worse than no light at all. He did not know yet that somewhere below him a small plane had already been turned back by the weather, and that a 60-year-old man with no coat, warm enough for 9 degrees, had just made the kind of decision that men who are used to being obeyed tend to make, that he would drive the last leg himself. The snow started at 5:40, the way mountain snow does, not a flurry working up to something, but all at once, as if a sack had split open over the pass. By 7, the lot was white. By 8, the wind had teeth. Wade stood in the office doorway under the amber lamp and watched the road disappear, foot by foot, until the VAAN sign at the end of the gravel was just a glow with no edges. The radio had stopped pretending. At 8:15, the advisory became a closure. US 26 over Togti shut at both gates. No through traffic, no estimate for reopening. That meant the pass was a sealed room now. Anything already on it was staying on it. "Nobody's coming up tonight," Ruth said. She'd said it like a comfort. She'd meant it as one. She was wrong, but it took until 11:40 to find out. The knock didn't sound like a knock at first. The wind had been throwing things at the building all night. Branches, ice, its own weight against the windows. And the first 3 blows on the office door folded right into that noise. It was the 4th that was different. Slower, lower down on the door than a man's fist usually lands. The sound of someone who has run out of the strength to knock high. Wade was at the door before Ruth got out of her chair. The man on the step was not dressed for the mountain. That was the first thing Wade cataloged, the way 30 years had taught him to read a body before he read a face. A long wool overcoat, the kind you wore in a city, to walk from a car to a building, soaked black to the shoulders and stiffening at the hem where the wet had begun to freeze. No hat, no gloves, city shoes packed with snow. The man was maybe 60 gray at the temples, a 2-day beard gone white with frost, and he was holding the doorframe with both hands the way you hold a railing on a boat. "I'm sorry," the man said. His voice came out slurred and slow, the words arriving a half-second late. "I went off the road. Up past the gate. I've been walking. I don't know how long. How long since you could feel your hands?" The man looked at his own hands as if the question surprised him. He didn't answer. That was the answer. "Okay." Wade got an arm around him. "You're done walking. Come in." Behind him, Ruth was already moving, not toward the phone, toward the back where the quilts lived. She had not asked who he was. She had taken one look at the frost in the man's beard and the gray creeping up under his eyes, and she had decided the only thing that mattered, which was that he was cold and she was not. "What's your name?" Wade asked, walking him to the chair nearest the wood stove. "Cale. Emmett." "All right, Emmett. I'm Wade. You're at the Larkspur, and you're not going anywhere tonight. And that's a good thing, you hear me? Best thing that's happened to you in an hour." He was talking the steady way you talk to a man you don't want to let drift, the way he'd talked across a dozen bad nights to men in worse shape than this. "I need to get you out of that coat." The mantra wasn't a thing Wade said out loud. It was a thing he did. We don't leave a man out in the cold. He'd already done it before he'd thought it. He got Emmett into the chair and went to work, and the work was the kind that doesn't look like much from across a room. No drama, no rush, just a sequence, each step in its order. He stripped the frozen coat and the soaked shirt under it and got a dry quilt around the man's core first. Not his hands, not his feet, his core, because Wade knew the thing that kills you in the cold isn't the cold in your fingers. It's the cold blood in your fingers reaching your heart all at once when you warm the wrong end first. He'd seen it. He didn't intend to see it again in his own office. He pressed 2 fingers under the angle of Emmett's jaw and counted against the second hand of the clock over the register. Counted again. Frowned. The pulse was there, but it was wrong. Too slow, then a stumble, then a little run of beats too close together, like a man tripping on a stair. Emmett, you got a heart thing? Take anything for it? They put me on something. After the spring, Emmett's eyes were sliding closed. It's in the car. The car's where you left it. Don't need the car. Wade kept his voice flat and easy and put his hand flat on the man's chest, just resting it there, feeling. Stay with me. Eyes here. Tell me your daughter's name. Don't have a flicker, a son, Theo. Good. We're going to get you home to Theo. Stay awake and talk to me about Theo. Della had come in from the cafe side and stopped dead in the doorway, snow still on her shoulders from the dash between buildings. She was 17, and she had read about this in a pamphlet that morning, and now it was 8 feet away from her and breathing wrong. Della. Wade didn't turn around. Phone. Call it in. Tell them altitude, 60-year-old male, exposure, hypothermia, irregular pulse, possible cardiac history. Tell them the pass is closed and ask them what they want me to do until it opens. Della's hands shook on the phone, but her voice came out level, and Wade noted that without saying it. Some people fall apart loud. She'd fallen apart quiet and kept working, which was the only kind of falling apart that was any use to anybody. The dispatcher said what Wade already knew. Both gates were sealed. Plows wouldn't touch the grade until the wind dropped, and the wind wasn't dropping. The closest unit was in Dubois, 16 miles down a road that no longer existed. Keep him warm. Keep him still. Watch his breathing. If he stops, you know what to do. Do you know what to do? And Della, looking across the room at Wade with his hand flat on a stranger's chest, said into the phone, "We know what to do." They settled in for it. There was no other word. The ambulance was 40 minutes away on a night when 40 minutes had become the rest of their lives, and so the 40 minutes belonged to Wade. Ruth brought broth, not soup. Broth because a half-frozen man can sip what he can't chew, and she fed it to Emmett a spoonful at a time, warm not hot, blowing across it first out of pure habit, the way she'd have done for a grandchild she didn't have. She tucked the second quilt around his legs. She put her dry palm against his cheek and held it there a moment, and Emmett Cale, who employed 1,100 people across 4 states, and had not been touched by a stranger without an agenda in 20 years, leaned his frozen face into a 70-year-old woman's hand and made a sound that was almost a sob. "There," Ruth said. "There now. The hours went the way those hours go." Wade rewarmed him slow, checked the pulse every 15 minutes, watched the stumble in it. Ease, then ease again. Somewhere past 2, the worst of it broke. The color came back up into Emmett's face, from gray to something nearer human. The shivering changed from the deep, dangerous stillness back to the ordinary chatter of a cold man getting warm. Wade let out a breath he'd been holding since 11:40. It was around then, propped in the chair with a quilt to his chin and the wood stove ticking, that Emmett Cale started asking questions. And the questions were strange. "This place," he said. His voice had its edges back. "How long's it been losing money?" Wade, crouched to add a split of pine to the stove, didn't look up. That a usual question for a man who nearly froze to death 4 hours ago? Habit. I'm sorry. A pause. It is, though, I can see it. The sign, the dead ice machine, 12 units and not one car in the lot in a snow. You're carrying it on something thin. Emmett's eyes, sharper now, moved around the room and landed on the office desk, where the soft folded bank letter lay face down. A note coming due. "You read a lot from a chair. It's the only thing I'm good at." Emmett pulled the quilt tighter. "People think it's money. It's not money. It's reading the soft spot. I've been doing it my whole life." He said it without pride, almost tired. Then quieter. "5 doors tonight, did I tell you that? Before yours." A hotel down the mountain. The woman at the front looked at the coat and waved me back out into it like I was tracking in mud. A gas station. 2 houses with the lights on. 5 doors, and the only one that opened was the one with the least to spare. He looked at the amber lamp burning in the window. "Why'd you open it?" Wade stood up, brushed the bark off his hands. He thought about Emory and 1991 and a deal made over bad coffee. He thought about the index card on the corkboard. Wasn't really a decision, he said. Door was the same as it always is. You were just the one who knocked. 40 minutes down the mountain, in a dark house with one window lit, Vivian Marsh was not asleep. She'd told herself it was the storm keeping her up, the wind working at the new construction, the investor flying in Thursday. But what kept circling back every time she closed her eyes was the hotel lobby that afternoon, and a man in a wet coat. She'd been at the front desk going over Thursday's arrival list when he'd come in stamping snow off ruined shoes, and she had looked at him, the soaked wool, the no hat in a blizzard, the slow, careful way broke men move when they're about to ask for something free. And she had not even let him reach the desk. A small motion of her hand. We're full. They weren't full. They were never full. She'd turned back to the arrival list before he was out the door, and she had not thought about him again until the wind came up, and the temperature fell off a cliff, and she was lying in the dark, doing the arithmetic of 9 degrees on a man with no coat. He'd find somewhere, she told herself. People like that always did. She turned the pillow to its cold side and lay there with her eyes open until the window went from black to gray. By the time the light came up, the wind had quit. The snow had stopped sometime before dawn, and the world outside the Larkspur was the blank, ringing white of a mountain after a storm, every sound gone except the tick of the cooling stove. Emmett Cale slept 3 hours in the chair and woke before 6, clearer than Wade liked for a man who should have been hospital-bound, and he was already pulling on his half-dried shirt when Wade came in from checking the road. "You need to get looked at," Wade said. "Your heart did some things last night I didn't love. I'll see my own people. I always do." Emmett was working buttons with fingers that didn't quite obey yet. There was a car already idling at the end of the gravel. He'd made a call on Della's phone at first light, a number he knew by heart, and someone had come from somewhere the way someone always seemed to come for men like Emmett Cale. "I don't have words for what you did. I'm not going to embarrass us, both trying to find them at 6 in the morning." "Then don't. Just go see a doctor." Emmett stopped at the door. He looked back at the room. The stove, the quilts, Ruth asleep upright in the cafe chair, the amber lamp still burning against a sky that no longer needed it. Then he did a thing Wade didn't understand until much later. He set something down on the corner of the desk, beside the face-down letter, and he straightened it with one finger so it sat square to the edge. "Leave the light on," Emmett said, which was a strange thing to say, because Wade had never told him the lamp had a rule. And then he was gone, out into the white, into the idling car, down the path the plows had finally opened. Wade walked over to the desk. There was a folded square of cafe napkin, and on it, in a hand that shook a little from the cold, 4 words, "I pay my debts." Under the napkin, a small brass keychain, a fob, heavy with a logo pressed into it, a stylized open road and 3 letters Wade didn't recognize. Della came in stamping snow, saw the fob in his hand. "What's that?" "Don't know." Wade turned it in the light. The letters meant nothing to him. Fella left it. "Lemme see." Della took out her phone, not to look, to photograph it, both sides, the way she'd learned to document a thing before it walked off. She didn't know why she did it. She'd say later, she just had a feeling. She tucked the phone away and went to start the coffee, and outside the amber lamp burned on into the brightening morning, and none of the 3 of them had the faintest idea that the man in the idling car had spent the drive down the mountain on the phone, saying a single name over and over to people who wrote it down. The boxes started on Tuesday. The first one was on the office step when Wade opened up. A plain carton, no label, no tape, the flaps just folded over each other. Inside, 2 new tarps still in plastic, a coil of weather stripping, a box of furnace filters in the right size for the Larkspur's ancient unit, road salt, a case of motor oil. $300 of supplies, easy, and not a name anywhere on it. Wade stood in the cold, turning it over with his boot, like it might have a return address on the bottom. It didn't. Customer left it, Ruth decided. Somebody passing through couldn't pay last winter, squaring up. Nobody squares up with furnace filters. He carried it inside and didn't put it away. He set it on the end of the cafe counter where he could keep an eye on it, the way you keep an eye on a thing you don't understand. Wednesday, there were two more. Thursday, a man Wade had never seen pulled in driving a clean white pickup, ate a full breakfast he didn't seem to need, tipped $40 on an $11 check, and asked Ruth, casual, friendly, how long the lodge had been in the family. He took a photograph of the VA ANSI sign on his way out. My wife collects pictures of old signs, he said, and was gone before Ruth thought to ask which way he was headed. She told Wade about it at lunch. He listened with his coffee halfway to his mouth and set it back down without drinking. Two photographs, he said. He said his wife. He took two, one of the sign and one of the office. Wade had watched the man do it through the window without quite registering it until now. Nobody photographs an office for their wife. Ruth went quiet. Then she went and got the brass fob out of the register drawer, where she'd put it for safekeeping, and set it on the counter between them. Della pulled this up, on her phone. She's been at it since Monday. Della had, in fact, been at it since Monday. 17 and stubborn and raised on the idea that any question had an answer. If you were rude enough to the internet, she'd photograph the fob, run the logo, hit a wall, run the 3 letters with the word logistics and trucking and freight attached one at a time, and on the 4th try she'd found it, a company. Not a big regional outfit. A large one, terminals in 4 states, a fleet you'd pass on the interstate a dozen times a day without ever reading the name. The open road logo matched the fob exactly. She'd shown the screen to Wade Thursday afternoon. He'd looked at it a long moment. Means a fella who works there left his keychain, he said. That's all that means. Wade, the guy you saved, was driving a rental. In a blizzard. Alone. She lowered her voice even though it was just the two of them, with a heart thing. Who does that? Who has a fob from a company that big and drives himself over a closed pass at midnight with no coat? Somebody who made a bad call about the weather. Same as half the men I ever met. Wade handed the phone back. But he didn't say it with the certainty he wanted, and Della heard the gap in it, and she did not let the fob go back in the drawer. She kept it in her coat pocket after that, like a coin she was saving. The thing that cracked it open, though, didn't come from the fob. It came from the ambulance, the EMS crew that finally made it up the pass the morning after the storm, too late to do anything but write a report, had stopped back through on Friday the way mountain crews do, to check on a call that had stuck with them. The senior medic, a square man named Pruitt with 20 years on the job, sat at Ruth's counter. Drinking coffee he insisted on paying for, and listening to Della tell it, because Della told it well and could not stop telling it. He warmed the core first, she said, not the hands, the core, and he wouldn't let the guy sleep, kept him talking, and he had his hand flat on his chest the whole time, like he was listening to it. Pruitt set his cup down. Who taught you core first? Wade did last week. He said it like it was nothing. It's not nothing. Pruitt looked across the cafe to where Wade was wedged under the sink fixing a trap, just his boots and his patience showing. Lady, that's not first aid class core first. That's the thing they teach you when the hospital's an hour away and it's just you. That's combat lifesaver. That's a man who learned medicine somewhere they were shooting at him. He said it with the flat respect of one tradesman recognizing another's work in the field. What unit was he? He doesn't talk about it. They never do, the real ones. Pruitt finished his coffee and left a 5 he wasn't supposed to leave, and on his way out he stopped by Wade's boots and said something low that Della didn't catch, and Wade said something back, and Pruitt laughed once and left. What Pruitt had said was, "You ever want to teach the refresher course down in Dubois, you've got a slot." And what Wade had said back was, "I've got a lodge to lose first." He'd meant it as a joke. Pruitt, who'd seen the white pickup in the lot and heard the talk starting in town, didn't think it was a joke at all, because the talk had started. That was the thing about a county this empty. A story moved through it like weather. By Friday, the version going around Dubois was that the broke veteran up at the Larkspur had pulled some rich man back from the death in the storm. And nobody knew who the rich man was, and the not knowing was the best part. Folks who'd never driven up the pass found reasons to. A jar appeared on the gas station counter for the Larkspur, and nobody admitted to putting it there. If you've ever watched a place full of people decide, quietly and all at once, that they were wrong about someone, that the man they'd driven past for years was worth driving toward. You know it doesn't happen with a speech. It happens with a jar on a counter that nobody admits to. Keep that in mind a while. It matters more than it looks. 40 miles down the mountain, the same story landed very differently. Vivian heard it from Royce, who heard everything. He came into the sales office Friday with 2 coffees and the particular looseness of a man enjoying himself. "Funny one for you," he said. "Your teardown up the pass. Turns out the owner's a hero now. Pulled some stranded fella out of the storm. Tuesday night half froze. Whole town's gone soft over it." He set a coffee in front of her. "Doesn't change anything. Bank's still nervous. Notes still due in 5 days, hero or not. If anything, it's better. Man's broke and distracted. We close it next week." Vivian wasn't listening to the last part. She'd gone still at Tuesday night, at Stranded Fella. "Where?" she said. "Which night?" "Tuesday." "The blizzard." "Why?" She didn't answer. She was back in her own lobby, in the warm, looking at a man in a soaked wool coat and a 2-day beard, waving him out into 9 degrees with a flick of her hand because she'd read him in half a second, and the reading had said broke and trouble, and not my problem. She'd told herself he'd find somewhere. He had the last door on the mountain. The one she was 4 days from buying out from under the only man in the county who'd opened one. Vivian. Royce was watching her. "You good?" "Who was the stranger?" she said. "Nobody knows. Drifter sounds like." Royce shrugged. "Why does it matter?" It mattered for a reason Vivian could not yet name and would not let herself look at directly. She thought about Thursday, about the investor flying in. Emmett Cale, who did not waste trips, who reads soft spots for a living, who was coming personally to look at the site. She thought about how a man like that traveled when he wanted to see a thing truly, before anyone could dress it up for him. She thought, no, that's paranoid. Men like that don't drive themselves over passes in the dark. But she'd grown up 40 miles from here. She knew exactly what it looked like when a person wanted to see who you really were before you knew they were watching. Her own mother had done it her whole childhood, walked into a room plain and quiet just to catch the truth of it. "Push the Cale meeting," she heard herself say. "Can't. He's confirmed. Thursday." Royce frowned. "Viv, it's one site visit." "Smile. Walk him through the rendering. He writes the check. We close the lodge. Everybody's rich. What's the problem?" "No problem," she said. "Make it clean." But she didn't sleep again that night either. Up at the Larkspur, Friday closed out cold and clear. Della had gone home. Ruth had banked the cafe stove. Wade was doing his last walk of the property the way he did every night, checking the units that had no one in them, rattling the dead ice machine out of habit, ending at the office door under the amber lamp to screw it that last quarter turn that kept the wind from working it loose. The office phone rang at 9:40. Almost nobody called the office line. Wade picked it up. Larkspur. A man's voice, brisk, unfamiliar, the kind of voice that scheduled things for other people. "Mr. Corliss? I'm calling on behalf of someone you helped this week. He'd like to ask a favor, and he'd like me to ask it strangely, so bear with me." A pause, a paper sound. "Saturday morning. He'd like you to have the place open early and the light on. Your porch light, the amber one, specifically. Before dawn, whatever happens, he asks that you leave it on. Can you do that?" Wade looked through the window at the lamp burning steady against the black. "Mister," he said, "that light's been on every night for 30-some years. I expect it can manage one more." He thought you'd say that. The line went dead. Wade stood holding the receiver a moment longer. Outside, the mountain was silent, the way only altitude gets silent, a cold so complete it had a sound. He set the phone down, killed the cafe lights, and on his way through he checked the cash box out of pure reflex, the way you press a bruise. $58. 4 days. He left the amber light on, the way he always did, the way he'd promised a dead man he would, and he went to bed not knowing that down the mountain 2 people were lying awake about the same Saturday morning for entirely opposite reasons, and that one of them was about to be proven right, and the other about to be undone by the same 31 sets of headlights climbing towards a single light on a hill. The Kale meeting fell apart before it began. Thursday came, and the investor did not. There was no plane, no town car, no walkthrough of the rendering Vivian had stared at like a photograph of a child. Instead, there was a phone call from an assistant, brisk, polite, final, saying Mr. Kale had been delayed by a personal matter and would be reviewing the Crest opportunity on his own timeline, and that the firm would be in touch. The assistant did not say no. People at that level rarely said no. They said on our own timeline, and you learned to hear the no inside it. Royce took it better than Vivian did, which told her something. Delays happen, he said, rolling his coffee cup between his palms. Doesn't change the play. We close the lodge Monday whether Kale's in or out. Land's land. We'll have a buyer. He was supposed to come see it, and now he's seeing it some other way. Royce shrugged, and there was something in the shrug Vivian didn't like. A man who'd stopped needing the front parlor and was happy to do the rest in the back. Honestly, Viv, the less he sees, the better. You want him reading the site, or you want him reading a brochure? She didn't answer. She'd spent 4 nights not answering the thing circling her, and it was getting harder to keep it in the dark. A personal matter, his own timeline. Tuesday night. She kept setting the pieces down next to each other and kept refusing to let them touch. On Friday, she drove up the pass herself. She told herself it was due diligence. You don't close on a property you've never stood on. She told herself a lot of things on the 16 miles of switchbacks, the valley dropping away white and enormous below her, and none of them survived the first sight of the place. The Larkspur was smaller than the tax map made it look, and poorer, and she hadn't expected this, kept. A broke man lets a place go in a particular order, paint first, then gutters, then the things that don't show. This place had been let go in no order at all, which meant someone fought it every day. The gravel was raked. The salt was down in a neat band by every door. The dead units had their curtains squared, and by the office door, burning in full daylight where it did absolutely nothing, was a porch lamp with an amber bulb. She knew that lamp. She had spent 4 nights picturing a man freezing somewhere, because she'd waved him off, and she had never once pictured where he'd ended up. And now she was looking at it, the actual amber light, the last door on the mountain, and her stomach turned over slow. Wade came out of the office wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't know her. Why would he? To him, she was a woman in a good coat getting out of a clean car, and he'd learned long ago not to decide about people in half a second the way the rest of the world had decided about him. Help you? Are you the owner? For 4 more days. He said it without bitterness, which somehow made it worse. What can I do for you? She had a whole approach prepared. She did acquisitions adjacent for a living. She knew how to walk onto a man's land and make leaving it sound like his idea. I represent a development group. We're assembling parcels. I think we could make this easy for you, given your situation. The word situation doing the quiet work of I know you're drowning. She'd used the speech a dozen times. It worked because it let the seller pretend it wasn't a defeat. She opened her mouth to give it, and what came out was, I think I owe you an apology. Wade tilted his head. Don't believe we've met, ma'am. We haven't. Not really. Vivian's hand had come up to her sternum without her telling it to. There was a man, Tuesday night, the storm. He came into my hotel down the mountain, soaked through, and I didn't let him reach the desk. I waved him out. I told him we were full. We weren't full. The words were coming faster now, the way water comes once the first crack opens. And then it got to 9 degrees, and I lay awake telling myself he'd find somewhere, and now I'm standing in the somewhere he found, and She stopped. He's all right, isn't he? You got him through it. Wade was quiet a long moment. Out on the pass, a truck downshifted, far away, and the sound rolled up the valley and faded. He's all right, Wade said. Sat right there in that chair. Ruth fed him broth till his color came back. He studied her, and there was no triumph in it. No, so it was you. Just a tired, level kindness that was harder to stand under than any accusation. You drove up here to tell me that? I drove up here to buy your lodge. She made herself say it. After the rest, the truth seemed like the only currency she had left. That's what the apology is. I came to take the last door on the mountain, the one I should have been, and turn it into a parking lot for a resort. And I think I'd have done it too, if I hadn't seen that light. She looked at the amber lamp again. My mother used to do that, she said, and she didn't know why she was telling a stranger this, except that the place seemed to pull it out of her. Walk into a room plain and quiet, before anybody fixed themselves up, just to see what was really there. I grew up 40 miles from here in a town that isn't on anybody's map, and I have spent 30 years making sure nobody could look at me and see it. And the first cold night, the first man who looked like where I'm from, I waved him off without even letting him talk. Her voice had gone unsteady. She got it back. I'm good at reading the soft spot in a thing. It's my whole job. I read yours. I read it as weakness. I think it might be the opposite. Wade let that sit. He didn't rush to comfort her, didn't tell her it was fine, because it wasn't. And they both knew a too quick it's fine would have been its own kind of lie. That note, he said finally. The 11-4, you came up here knowing about it. Your people leaning on the bank? Vivian closed her eyes. Yes. Wade nodded slowly. He didn't get angry. Anger was a thing he'd spent down years ago and never restocked. Then I expect you can lean the other way just as easy if you decide to. I don't know if I can stop it. Royce, the man I work with, he's got it most of the way done. It's not just my call anymore. It was the truth, and saying it out loud showed her, for the first time, how far she'd handed her own hands to someone else. I let it get past me. That's the honest answer. Then that's the answer. Wade tucked the rag in his back pocket. I'm not going to beg you, ma'am. I made a promise to a man to keep this place open as long as I could, and I'm going to keep it open right up until the morning somebody takes it, and I'd do that with or without you. The light stays on either way. He almost smiled. You want a cup of coffee before you drive back down? Ruth's got a pot. She won't ask you a single thing about who you are. It's her best quality. Vivian Marsh, who had walked onto the property to take it, sat at Ruth Whitlock's counter and drank a cup of coffee she did not deserve and was not charged for. And somewhere in the middle of it, she stopped being a woman doing acquisitions and became, briefly, just a person from 40 miles away who'd been seen. She drove down the mountain at dusk with the rendering in her mind for the first time, looking not beautiful but thin, a glass box full of people in expensive coats who did not look cold, built on the spot where the only warm light for 16 miles used to be. That night she called Royce, pulled the bank off the Larkspur note. A long pause. Say again? You heard me. Back off the balloon. Let the man have his window. Viv, Royce's voice had changed, gone careful, gone cold. It's done. The bank moves Monday. I'm not unwinding 3 weeks of work because you had a feeling on a site visit. The land's the whole sight line. Without it, the crest doesn't pencil, and you know it. A beat? Where's this coming from? It's coming from me. It's my project. It's the investor's money. Royce said it gently, which was the most frightening way he could have said it. And right now the investors are very interested in why the lead just lost her nerve over a motel. He let that land. Sleep on it. Monday it closes. You'll thank me in a year when you're cutting the ribbon. He hung up before she could answer, and Vivianson sat in her dark house and understood, fully and for the first time, that the soft spot she was best at reading had been her own all along, that she'd handed it to a man who'd found it and leaned, and that getting it back was going to cost more than a phone call. So she stopped trying to do it with a phone call. The next morning she went around Royce. She drove to the bank in Dubois herself, before it opened, and she stood in the lot until the manager unlocked the door. And she told him the truth, that the pressure on the Larkspur note had come from her group, that she was withdrawing it, and that if the bank wanted a quiet sale it could have one, just not this one, not that man. The manager, who had known Wade Corliss for 15 years and had hated every step of the file, looked at her a long moment and said it might already be too late to unwind. The paper had moved, but he'd try. Vivian said, "Try harder," and left her own name on it in writing, which was the part Royce would never have done, putting herself on the line where the investors could see it. She called Royce from the bank lot and told him what she'd done. The silence on the line was the longest of her life. Then he said, very quietly, that she'd just ended her own project, that the investors would hear about it by noon, and that he hoped the motel was worth it. He wasn't wrong about any of it. She knew that. She watched the sun come up over a town she'd grown up 40 miles from and felt, for the first time in 30 years, like she could be seen standing in it. What she didn't know, what she wouldn't learn until she drove up the pass the next day, was that 60 miles south, a man with a brass keychain had already made some calls of his own, and that her name on a bank document and his name on a wire transfer were about to arrive at the same place from opposite directions. Up at the Larkspur, the last days went by the way the last days of anything go, ordinary and unbearable for being ordinary. Della came up Saturday and Sunday and worked her shift and didn't mention the deadline because Ruth had asked her not to, and she carried the brass fob in her coat pocket the whole time like it was warm. On the 8th night, the night before the note came due, Wade did his walk later than usual. He didn't want it to end, and the walk was the thing that would end. So he stretched it. He checked the empty units. He rattled the dead ice machine. He stood a long while in the cafe doorway, looking at the room where a stranger had gotten his color back, and at Emery's index card yellowing on the corkboard, and at the cash box that still, stubbornly, said $58. He ended where he always ended, at the office door, and he gave the amber lamp its quarter turn against the wind. Then he stood out in the cold a minute longer than the chore required. The mountain was black and enormous and silent. Tomorrow a man from the bank would drive up this gravel with a folder, and Wade would hand over the keys to a place a dead sergeant had trusted him with, and the light Emery wired in 1991 would go out for the first time in 30 years because the rule only worked as long as the door was yours to keep. He was about to go in when he heard it. Far off down the pass below the gate, an engine. Then under it, around it, more. Not one engine. A low, building, layered rumble, the sound of something large beginning to climb in the dark. Wade stood in the cold and listened and did not move, and the amber light burned steady behind him into the last hour of the night. They came up out of the dark at 6 minutes past dawn. The first thing over the gate was not a truck. It was a plow, a county rig with its blade down, throwing a clean wing of snow off the shoulder, opening the road. And behind the plow, headlights. Wade had heard them building for 20 minutes, and he'd told himself it was a convoy passing through, freight running the pass now that it was clear. Anything but the thing it turned out to be. He stood at the edge of the gravel in the gray half-light, with his coffee going cold in his hand, and watched them crest the rise 2 by 2. And he counted without meaning to, the way he counted everything. 31 trucks. Not all the same. Tractor units and flatbeds and a pair of box trucks and 2 contractor rigs with ladders racked on the sides and 1 battered van that turned out to be full of plumbers. They came up the grade in a long, unhurried line and turned into the Larkspur lot one after another, filling it, spilling onto the shoulder, parking in a formation nobody had been told to keep, but everybody kept anyway. The open road logo from the brass fob was on the door of the lead tractor, big as a man. Then the engines cut. All of them, close to at once, and the silence that dropped over the property afterward had a weight to it. The way a held breath has weight. A door opened on the lead truck, and a man climbed down, slow and careful, one hand on the rail. 60 years old, gray at the temples, color good now, in a canvas work coat that fit him. Emmett Cale crossed the snow to where Wade stood and stopped in front of him, and the two men looked at each other in the new light. "You left the light on," Emmett said. "Told you it'd manage one more night. It managed 9. Emmett's voice wasn't quite steady. He was a man who read soft spots for a living, who'd spent 30 years being the one who couldn't be surprised, and he'd been surprised in a chair by a wood stove, by a man who'd never asked him for a thing. "I owe you an explanation, and you're owed it standing up, so here it is. My name's Emmett Cale. I move freight. 4 states, about 1,100 people. I was on my way up here that night to look at a resort somebody wanted my money for. I don't let people dress a place up for me first. So I came quiet, in a rental, in a bad coat, and I made a stupid call about the weather. And 5 doors taught me what this county thinks of a man who looks like he's got nothing." He paused. "Yours was the 6th. You taught me something else." He turned and looked at the trucks, at the men already climbing down and pulling tarps off lumber, and his voice came up so the lot could hear it. "Most of these are mine, my drivers, my mechanics, my warehouse crew. A good number of them wore the uniform before they wore my company's name, which is not an accident, because I learned a long time ago who shows up when it's cold and who doesn't." A few of the men had stopped to listen. Most just kept working, which was its own kind of answer. "We've got until dark. Roof, units, the cafe, the sign. Anderson's crew has the lodge note." He looked back at Wade. "That's handled. Before the bank opens. You don't owe 11-4 to anybody as of about an hour ago. You owe me a cup of coffee, and you owe Ruth nothing, because there's no paying her back, and we all know it." Wade didn't speak. He couldn't for a second. He looked at the trucks and the men and the plow still idling at the road and his own raked gravel disappearing under 31 sets of boots. And what he finally said was, "I just opened a door." Emmett Cale almost laughed. "Don't ever say just to me, Wade. You opened the only one." The work started and didn't stop. It was the kind of day the mountain doesn't see twice in a generation. Cale's roofers were on the cafe before the sun cleared the ridge, tearing off the buckled shingles. Wade had patched 4 winters running. The plumbers took the units one by one. A box truck opened to reveal a new compressor, a real one, and 2 men muscled it toward the office while a third went looking for the dead ice machine to haul it off for good. Someone fixed the VANCY sign, replaced the burned C, and when it lit up reading vacancy for the first time in years, Ruth, who had come out onto the breezeway in her apron with a dish towel still in her hands, put the towel to her mouth and didn't take it down for a while. And the town came. That was the part nobody planned. The story had been moving through the county for a week like weather, and the sight of 31 trucks climbing the pass at dawn was the storm finally breaking. Pruitt came up off shift in his EMS jacket and started directing trucks like he'd been hired for it. The man who'd left the jar on the gas station counter turned out to be the gas station owner, and he drove up with the jar and a folding table and set both up by the cafe door without a word. Folks who'd driven past the Larkspur for 15 years drove to it and stood at the edge of the lot the way you stand at the edge of something you're not sure you're allowed into, until Ruth waved them in and put them to work or put a biscuit in their hand, usually both. Della stood in the middle of all of it with the brass fob in her fist, and when Emmett Cale found her, because he came looking, he'd asked Wade which one was the girl who ran his keychain to ground. He crouched down to her eye level the way busy men almost never do. "You're the one who figured out who I was." "I photographed the fob," Della said. "I had a feeling. Wade tells me you want to be a paramedic, that you read a blood pressure cuff and you didn't fall apart loud the night I came in." Emmett reached into his coat and came out with a card, plain, and a number written on the back. "Casper College, the program, tuition, books, the drive, the gear, it's covered, all 4, however long it takes. 2 conditions." He held up a finger. "You finish. And when you're qualified, you work this county a while, the empty one. The one where the ambulance is 40 minutes out, and the only help is whoever's awake." He looked at the amber lamp. "We need the people who stay." Della looked at the card, then at Wade across the lot, who was teaching one of Cale's young mechanics his daddy's trick for finding a bad bearing through a screwdriver against the ear. She nodded once hard, the way you nod when you don't trust your voice. Vivian Marsh came up the pass at noon. She came alone, in the clean car, and she parked at the bottom of the gravel because there was no room left up top. And she walked up through the trucks and the noise and the steam of Ruth's coffee table, not as a buyer of anything, but as a woman who had to see it. Royce was not with her. Royce was, in fact, already gone. By noon the day before, the investors had heard two things at once: that their lead had walked into a bank and pulled her own group off the Larkspur note in writing, and that Emmett Cale had cleared that same note himself and pulled out of the Crest entirely. The man who read soft spots read the only one that mattered to him. The money was leaving. The lead had lit herself on fire, and there was nothing left in this town worth leaning on. He packed his quarter zips and his folders and started making other calls in other towns. The Crest at Togwotee did not pencil without Cale, and it would not have survived Vivian's signature even if he'd stayed. It died the way those things die, quietly in an email, with no one to grieve it. There was no plaque for that. There didn't need to be. It had cost her the project and her standing with the investors and most of what she'd spent 30 years building. And she'd done it a full day before she knew Cale would make it survivable, which was the only part that mattered to her now. She jumped without the net. The net had simply turned out to be there. Vivian found Wade by the cafe door. "It fell apart," she said. "The resort," he pulled out. "Royce is gone." She wasn't gloating and she wasn't grieving. She was just reporting the way you report weather to someone who already felt it. And before he did, "I want you to know I went to the bank myself. Pulled my group off your note. Put my name on it." She said it plainly, no credit seeking in it, just a fact she needed him to have. "Turned out Cale beat me to the paying part, but I'd already jumped. I needed you to know I jumped before I knew there was anything to land on." She took an envelope out of her coat. "This isn't money for you. You'd hand it back and I'd deserve that. It's for the fund. Cale told me what they're building. I want in, not for the rendering, because I waved a man into 9 degrees and somebody 16 miles up the mountain didn't." Wade took the envelope. He didn't make a speech, and he didn't make her grovel, and he didn't for 1 second enjoy the sight of her undone, because there was nothing in him that needed it. He just looked at her for a moment with that level, tired kindness, and then he nodded. One small nod. The kind you give a person when the thing between you is finished and doesn't need words on top of it. "Ruth's got coffee," he said. "Same rule as last time. She won't ask you a thing." It was Cale who named the fund, but it was Ruth who told them what it was for, standing on the breezeway that evening with the work winding down and the amber lamp coming into its own as the light failed. The Whitlock Light Fund, after a sergeant most of them never met, who'd wired a lamp in 1991 and made a rule about it. It would do two things. It would put money behind people like Della, kids from empty counties going into the trades, and the medic programs, the ones who stayed. And every lodge, every motel, every roadside place that wanted to be part of it would keep one room, always free, always ready, for whoever came down out of the cold with nowhere left to knock. One door that always said yes. "There's a rule, though," Wade said, when Cale handed him the first page to sign. Same one Emery had. "You can write all this down however you want, but the rule underneath it doesn't change." He looked around the breezeway, at Ruth, at Della with her card, at Vivian holding a coffee she hadn't been charged for, at 31 drivers loading their tools back up in the dusk. "We don't leave a man out in the cold, not on my watch, not on anybody's." He signed it. By full dark, the trucks were gone. Back down the pass 2 by 2, taillights stringing out along the switchbacks until the last one dropped below the ridge and the mountain went quiet again. The cafe smelled of fresh paint and Ruth's biscuits. The new sign read vacancy in clean letters, and by the office door, doing nothing useful in the dark the way it did its best work. The amber lamp burned on. Wade stood under it a while before he went in. He thought about a deal made over bad coffee, and a dead man's index card, and $58 that didn't matter anymore, and a stranger he'd warmed core first, because that was the part that kept you alive. Then he reached up and gave the lamp its quarter turn against the wind, the way he had every night for 30 years, the way he meant to for 30 more. Inside, Ruth had left a biscuit on the counter for him, the way she always did, made that morning, made with worry, and worry made it taste like nothing else. I keep coming back to the lamp. Not the trucks, not the money, the lamp. He left it on every night for years when no one ever came, which is the only reason it meant anything the night somebody finally did. I think that's the part we get backward. We wait to be sure it'll matter before we leave the light on. He just left it on.